If you feel stuck, it isn't because you lack discipline. It isn't because you're lazy. And it isn't because you don't care. Most of the time, being stuck is not a personality flaw. It's a prediction problem. Your brain is not designed to chase progress. It's designed to minimize risk. And the simplest way to minimize risk is to repeat what it already understands. Even when what it understands is uncomfortable, even when it's limiting, even when it's costing you time, familiar patterns feel safer than unfamiliar outcomes, because the brain can predict familiar pain. It cannot predict unfamiliar change. So what looks like I won't do it is often I can't confirm it's safe yet. This video is an explanation of that process. Not motivation, not advice. Just the mechanics of why your brain can prefer staying stuck, even when you consciously want to move. To understand this, you have to separate two different parts of you. There is the part that can think in ideas. That part can see the future, set goals, and understand consequences. But there is also a part that runs safety. That part is older than your goals. It doesn't speak in language. It speaks in sensations, tension, resistance, fatigue, urgency, avoidance. And its job is not to make you successful. Its job is to keep you stable. Stable means predictable. Predictable means survivable. The brain learns survivable from repetition. If you have repeated a pattern for long enough, the brain logs it as a known environment, even if it is a bad one. That's why you can logically know something is harming you, and still feel a pull toward it. Safety systems are not persuaded by logic. They are persuaded by evidence. Repetition is evidence. That's why change feels suspicious at first. When you try to change, you are not just adding a new behavior. You are removing a familiar one, and removing a familiar pattern creates uncertainty. Uncertainty is expensive for the brain because it increases monitoring. Monitoring means more scanning, more checking, more internal noise. This is why, when you decide to do the right thing, it can feel like effort suddenly increases. It's not that the action is harder. It's that the brain is running additional background processes. Is this safe? Is this stable? Is this going to fail? Will this cost me socially? Will I lose control? A stuck pattern often has hidden benefits. It reduces decision load. It preserves identity. It keeps outcomes familiar. It avoids exposure. Even procrastination can be a stability strategy because it delays uncertainty. So the brain resists change not out of stupidity, but out of economy. It's trying to conserve resources and avoid unpredictable cost. That's what it was built to do. This is why the early phase of change often feels worse than staying the same. Staying the same is known. The consequences are mapped. You already know what happens if you avoid, delay, or retreat. You might dislike it, but it's predictable. Change is not mapped yet. It introduces open loops, and open loops create mental tension. The brain hates open loops because they demand resolution. That demand feels like pressure, and pressure is often misread as a sign that you're doing something wrong. But pressure is sometimes just the feeling of uncertainty. The moment you step into a new behavior, you temporarily lose the certainty of the old one without having earned the certainty of the new one. That middle zone is where most people quit, not because they can't do it, but because their nervous system interprets unfamiliar as unsafe. The mind calls it, "I'm not ready." The body calls it, "Stop." Both are trying to protect you from the unknown. There is another layer, identity. Identity is not just who you are, it is who you expect yourself to be. And the brain protects identity, because identity creates predictability. If your self-image includes "I struggle," "I always start and stop," "I'm inconsistent," or even I'm the one who thinks deeply but doesn't act, those labels become stabilizing. They reduce ambiguity. They also reduce responsibility. When you change, you threaten the story. And threatening the story triggers resistance because it forces a rewrite. A rewrite is costly. It means new expectations, new standards, new risks. This is why some people can tolerate discomfort but cannot tolerate new identity. They can handle hard work, but they can't handle becoming someone different. Staying stuck can preserve a familiar identity, even if that identity hurts. You can see this when people say, "This is just who I am," as if it's a fact, when it's often a protective conclusion. Identity can be a cage, but it can also be a shield. The brain tends to keep shields. Now consider dopamine and reward. People often talk about dopamine as if it's pleasure. But dopamine is more accurately about prediction and pursuit. It rises when the brain expects a reward and can see a path to it. If the path is unclear, dopamine drops. This is why starting something new can feel dull, heavy, or pointless. It's not that the thing has no value, it's that the brain cannot yet predict reward reliably. Familiar habits, even unhealthy ones, have predictable reward loops: relief, distraction, comfort, numbness, certainty. New habits do not pay instantly. They pay later. Early change is delayed reward, and delayed reward requires trust in a future you cannot fully feel yet. That's difficult for a brain that prioritizes immediate stability. So the brain prefers the known loop, not because it is better, but because it is confirmed. Confirmed rewards beat imagined rewards. This is why I know this is good for me doesn't automatically create energy. Knowledge doesn't create prediction. Repetition does. This is also why trying harder often fails. Trying harder increases pressure. Pressure increases threat. Threat increases resistance. The brain reads intense effort as a sign of danger because, historically, intense effort often meant survival situations, conflict, scarcity, exposure, social risk. So when you push too hard, your nervous system can interpret your own effort as a threat signal. You then feel more avoidance, more fatigue, more mental fog. People misinterpret this as proof they are weak. But it may be the opposite. Your system is responding exactly as designed. It is protecting energy and limiting exposure. The problem is that modern goals are not survival threats, but the body doesn't always know that. It uses sensation, not logic, to decide. So intensity can backfire because it tells the system something dangerous is happening. A calm, repeatable approach teaches the opposite. This is normal. This is safe. That is why slow repetition is often more effective than dramatic bursts, especially for people who have lived in high pressure for a long time. The brain learns safety from consistency. Let's talk about avoidance, because avoidance is often misunderstood. Avoidance is not always fear of the task. It can be fear of what the task represents. Sometimes the task represents exposure, being seen, being judged, failing publicly, losing an excuse. Sometimes it represents loss, losing the identity of potential, losing the comfort of imagining change without risking it. Sometimes it represents disappointment. If you try and it doesn't work, then what? So avoidance protects you from deeper outcomes than the surface task, and the brain prefers protections it can trust. The brain also prefers clean emotional states. Avoidance can reduce mixed feelings. It turns conflict into relief. Relief is reinforcing, that's why avoidance is sticky. It works in the short term. It reduces tension now, even if it increases cost later. The brain is biased toward now, not because it is irrational, but because immediate safety is easier to verify than future benefit. This is why you can feel better after avoiding something and then feel worse later. The brain prioritizes the first feeling. It remembers the relief, not the debt. That's how stuck cycles sustain themselves. Another reason the brain prefers stuckness is that stuckness has boundaries. It is a known shape. When you're stuck, you often know the limits, how far you'll go, when you'll stop, what you'll avoid. That sounds negative, but boundaries create psychological containment. They reduce uncertainty. Progress removes containment, because progress opens possibilities. Possibilities sound positive, but they create new questions. What if I succeed? What will people expect? What do I do next? What if I can't maintain it? For some systems, success is more threatening than failure because success changes the social environment. It changes attention, responsibility, expectation, visibility. So staying stuck can be a way of staying socially and psychologically predictable. You can see this when someone improves briefly and then collapses, as if their system pulled them back. That collapse is not always lack of willpower. It can be a regulation strategy, returning to the familiar baseline to restore internal predictability. The goal of the brain is not to maximize achievement. It is to stabilize the organism. If achievement destabilizes, the brain pushes back. This is why clarity can feel heavy. People assume understanding should make action easier. But understanding often increases awareness of complexity. When you see more clearly, you see more consequences. You see more nuance. You see more of your own patterns. That can increase internal load. Sometimes ignorance feels lighter because it reduces self-monitoring. Once you see, you can't unsee. That creates responsibility. Responsibility creates weight, and weight can trigger resistance, because resistance is the system's way of saying, this is too much right now. So even insight can become a stressor if it is not paired with gradual integration. Many people think the solution is more insight, but more insight can produce more load. The system becomes saturated. It becomes tired. This is why people can binge psychology content and feel worse. They collect explanations but feel more stuck. Their awareness grows faster than their capacity to act. The gap between awareness and action creates shame. Shame increases threat. Threat increases avoidance. The cycle continues. The answer is not to stop understanding. It is to match understanding with a pace the nervous system can tolerate. This channel exists inside that pace. So what does unstuck actually mean in mechanical terms? It means your brain begins to treat a new behavior as familiar. That's it. Not inspiring. Not dramatic. Familiarity reduces monitoring. Monitoring reduces tension. Reduced tension makes repetition easier. That creates a new loop. But you cannot think your way into familiarity. You have to earn it through repetition. This is why the early stage feels unnatural. It is unnatural because it is new. The brain is correct to label it new. The mistake is interpreting new as wrong. Your system is not opposing you, it is evaluating. And evaluation is the price of change. The brain asks, does this lead to stability? It needs multiple exposures to answer. This is also why consistency matters more than intensity. Intensity creates peak experiences, but peaks do not create familiarity. Repetition does. Familiarity is built by the boring middle. The boring middle is where the brain quietly updates its predictions. People quit in the boring middle because it feels like nothing is happening. But something is happening. Your system is learning the new shape. That learning is the real change. There's also the concept of friction. Every behavior has friction, meaning a set of small resistances, time, effort, attention, social cost, emotional cost. Stuck patterns often have low friction because they are rehearsed. The steps are automatic. The mind doesn't have to decide much. New behaviors have higher friction because they require deliberate choice. Deliberate choice consumes energy. This is why even simple actions can feel heavy when you're changing. The heaviness isn't the action, it's the decision-making overhead. People often assume they need more motivation, but motivation doesn't remove friction, it temporarily masks it. Once motivation fades, friction returns, and the person concludes they failed. In reality, they encountered the normal cost of building a new pattern. A stable approach respects friction. It assumes friction will exist. It treats friction as information, not as defeat. If you build with friction in mind, you don't interpret resistance as proof that you're broken. You interpret it as proof that you're rewiring. Rewiring always comes with friction because it is the nervous system learning a new path. A new path is never as smooth as an old road. It becomes smooth through use. Now let's look at why your brain can prefer almost. Almost is a fascinating state. Almost means you get to feel progress without fully risking change. You plan, you research, you organize, you refine. That creates the emotional reward of movement, but it avoids the vulnerability of execution. Execution is where reality responds. Reality can reject you. Reality can disappoint you. Reality can expose limits. Almost keeps you in control. It allows the mind to stay in a clean fantasy of improvement. And fantasies are safer than outcomes, because outcomes are uncertain. The brain prefers control, and almost is a form of control. It's also why some people keep rebuilding systems and never using them. The system becomes the comfort object. The planning becomes the dopamine loop. The person looks productive, but the nervous system is still avoiding exposure. This is not moral failure, it's protective strategy. But it becomes a trap because the person confuses preparation with progress. Preparation is necessary, but it is not the same as contact with reality. Contact with reality is where the brain updates. Without contact, nothing updates. So the brain remains stuck, not because it can't change, but because it never receives the evidence that the new behavior is survivable. Social factors matter too. Humans are social organisms. Your brain monitors belonging. Belonging is safety. If change threatens belonging, the brain resists. Sometimes you don't consciously think, if I change, people won't like me. But your nervous system may still run that calculation. If your role in a family or group has been stable for years, change can disrupt it. People may respond differently. They may expect more. They may feel challenged. They may withdraw. So the brain can treat self-improvement as a social risk. This is why some people feel anxious when they begin to improve. They aren't afraid of the goal. They're afraid of the relational consequences. The system says, if I become different, will I still be accepted? And because the brain prioritizes social survival, it may protect your role more than your ambition. Again, this doesn't mean you shouldn't change. It means resistance is sometimes relational, not personal. It means stuckness can be a way of maintaining peace in a social environment, even if it costs your growth. Many people carry invisible loyalty to old roles. The nervous system defends those loyalties automatically, understanding that reduces self-judgment. It also makes the pattern easier to observe. There is also something called learned predictability. If you have lived through periods where effort didn't lead to reward, your brain learns a rule. Effort is dangerous, or effort is pointless. This isn't always conscious. It can come from childhood, work environments, relationships, or repeated disappointment. The brain adapts by reducing effort, because reduced effort reduces pain. It looks like low ambition, but it can be protection against repeated loss. So when you try to change, you are not only fighting laziness, You may be confronting a learned rule about what effort means. The nervous system says, "Last time I tried, it cost me." That message is stored in sensation, not words. That's why it can appear as tiredness, heaviness, or aversion. People often try to override this with discipline, but discipline can feel like aggression if the system associates effort with harm. The brain then resists even more. A calmer approach slowly teaches a new rule: effort does not always equal pain. That rule cannot be taught through speeches. It's taught through repeated, tolerable experiences. That is how the brain updates its predictions. Predictions change when reality is safe enough, often enough, for long enough. This is the moment when many people ask, "So what's the answer?" And the answer is not a trick. It's a principle. Your brain prefers staying stuck because stuckness is familiar, predictable, and therefore easy to regulate. The brain changes its preference when the new behavior becomes equally familiar and equally predictable. That requires time, repetition, and low-threat exposure. You do not persuade the nervous system with arguments. You persuade it with consistency. Consistency is not heroic. It is quiet. And it often feels anticlimactic because the brain updates gradually. That's why people miss it. They look for a moment where everything changes. But the system usually changes in small increments: slightly less resistance, slightly more tolerance, slightly faster recovery after effort. Those small signals are the real proof of change. In this sense, being unstuck is not a single decision. It's a change in what your system expects. When your system expects that action will not destroy you, it allows action. When it expects that uncertainty is manageable, it tolerates uncertainty. That's the goal: tolerating uncertainty without interpreting it as danger. Progress is mostly uncertainty tolerance. That's why it feels like courage, but mechanically, it's adaptation. Now consider why some people seem to change quickly. Often they are not changing quickly. They are changing in a domain where the nervous system already feels safe. The system might already trust competence there, or the social cost is low, or the identity cost is minimal. So the brain allows movement. In the domains where the nervous system feels threatened, those same people can be completely stuck. That's why comparisons are misleading. You don't know what someone's nervous system considers unsafe. Also, some people use urgency as fuel. Urgency can temporarily override resistance, but urgency is expensive. It often leads to burnout because the system cannot sustain high threat. So quick change is not always better. Slow change can be more stable because it's integrated. Integrated change means your system doesn't need to fight itself to maintain the behavior. It just becomes your normal, and normal is the goal. The brain loves normal. Normal means less scanning, less monitoring, less internal negotiation. This is why the most reliable change often looks boring from the outside. It's not dramatic, it's just stable. And stability is what your brain was seeking the whole time. Let's also address the feeling of, "I should be further by now." That feeling is often created by a mismatch between expectation and adaptation speed. The thinking mind can jump ahead. It can imagine a different life in minutes. But the nervous system adapts slowly because it needs repetition. So you can feel ready mentally while your body is still cautious. That mismatch creates frustration. Frustration can turn into self-attack. Self-attack increases threat. Increased threat increases stuckness. So the very emotion you use to push yourself can become the reason you can't move. In your system, pressure is often interpreted as danger. That's why pressure backfires. The calmer approach is not indulgence. It's strategy. It reduces threat so that learning can occur. You cannot learn under threat. Under threat, you protect. Protection looks like avoidance, scrolling, distraction, sleep, postponing. So the question is not, why am I like this? The question is, what threat is my system perceiving? Because when you find the perceived threat, resistance makes sense. And when resistance makes sense, it becomes easier to observe rather than fight. Fighting resistance is still threat. Observing it is information. Information is safer than punishment. That's the difference. This also explains why rest can feel wrong. Rest reduces action. But for some nervous systems, rest increases awareness. When you slow down, you feel things. You notice anxiety, emptiness, uncertainty. So the system may prefer busyness or distraction because they reduce contact with internal sensation. This is why people can feel more anxious when they finally have free time. They interpret this as rest is bad for me, when it might simply be rest removes distraction. If your brain associates stillness with discomfort, it will resist stillness. And if stillness is necessary for integration, you get trapped. You need rest to reset, but rest feels unsafe. Again, this is not moral failure. It's a learned association. The nervous system says, when we slow down, we feel too much, so it keeps moving. That movement can look like productivity, but it can also look like avoidance disguised as effort. Many people are not lazy. They are over-regulating. They're using action to escape sensation. Then when it's time for meaningful action, the system is exhausted. Exhaustion creates stuckness. The solution is not more pushing. It's learning which actions are regulation and which actions are progress. They are not always the same. So why does the brain prefer staying stuck? Because stuckness is a known environment. The brain treats known environments as safe enough. Change is unknown environment. The brain treats unknown environments as risky until proven otherwise. Proof is not intellectual. Proof is experiential. You prove safety by repeating small, tolerable actions and surviving them. You prove predictability by showing the system, we can do this again tomorrow. That's why consistency matters. Consistency teaches the nervous system that the new behavior is not an emergency. Emergency creates spikes and crashes. Normal creates sustainability. And sustainability is the real target. If your channel has taught you anything, it's that slow consistency builds identity. The same is true inside a person. If you want to become different, you don't chase dramatic transformation. You build repeated evidence. Evidence changes prediction. Prediction changes emotion. Emotion changes behavior. That's the chain. People often try to skip the evidence step and jump straight to behavior. But behavior without safety is unsustainable. It collapses. Then they conclude it's impossible. It wasn't impossible. It just wasn't integrated. Integrated change takes longer, but it stays. The brain prefers staying stuck until it learns that moving is safe. Once it learns that, staying stuck becomes less attractive because it feels smaller than it used to. There's a quiet marker that tells you the system is updating. The resistance becomes less dramatic. It doesn't vanish. It becomes quieter. You might still feel reluctance, but it's not a wall. It's a door you can open. Another marker is faster recovery. You do something difficult and you come back to baseline quicker. Another marker is reduced rumination. You spend less time arguing with yourself. These changes are subtle, and that's why people miss them. They expect motivation. They expect confidence. They expect certainty. But the nervous system often offers something else first: tolerance. Tolerance means you can hold discomfort without retreating immediately. That is progress, and it is measurable, even if it isn't exciting. Over time, tolerance becomes familiarity. Familiarity becomes ease. Ease becomes identity. Then people say, it's just who I am, but this time it's true, because it was earned. The brain didn't change because you forced it. It changed because you provided consistent evidence. Evidence is kinder than pressure. That's why the method is calm. Calm is not softness. Calm is precision. It reduces threat and increases learning. Learning is what unsticks you. If you take one idea from this video, let it be this. Stuckness is often a form of protection. Protection is not the enemy. Protection is the system doing its job. The goal is not to destroy protection. The goal is to update what protection is protecting you from. Sometimes it is protecting you from failure, sometimes from exposure, sometimes from disappointment, sometimes from responsibility, sometimes from feelings. Once you see that, the shame reduces. And when shame reduces, threat reduces. And when threat reduces, movement becomes possible. This is why some people change more after self-compassion than after discipline. Not because compassion is magical, but because compassion lowers threat. Lower threat allows learning. Learning allows new predictions. New predictions allow new behavior. The chain is consistent. That is why knowing doesn't help by itself. Knowledge without safety is just pressure. Safety creates permission. Permission creates repetition. Repetition creates change. This isn't inspirational. It's mechanical. And it's also hopeful because it means stuckness is not a life sentence. It's a state your system maintains until it is given enough evidence to update. Evidence is created through repeatable action, not through self-attack. This is why your channel's method works. It builds stability. Stability is the foundation of change. Now, as we close, notice the tone of this explanation. It doesn't blame you. It also doesn't excuse everything. It simply describes a system. When you understand the system, you stop treating resistance as a moral verdict. You start treating it as a signal. Signals can be worked with. Moral verdicts cannot. This is why explanation matters. It keeps the mind clean. It prevents spirals. And it respects the reality that most people are not failing because they don't care. They are failing because their nervous system is prioritizing predictability. Predictability feels like safety. Safety feels like survival. That's the hierarchy. Your goals sit below survival. So if your system thinks your goal threatens safety, it will resist, regardless of your intentions. That's why sheer willpower is unreliable. Willpower is a spike. Safety is a baseline. If you want a different baseline, you build different evidence, slowly, quietly, without drama. The method is not glamorous, but it is real. And it is the only method that doesn't require you to become a different person overnight. It allows you to become a different person through repetition. That is sustainable change. That is how the brain updates. So if your brain prefers staying stuck, it doesn't mean you're broken. It means your system is doing what systems do. It repeats what it knows. The question becomes, what has it learned to treat as safe? What has it learned to treat as dangerous? Those learned rules can be updated, but they update through experience, not through pressure. The most important thing is to stop interpreting resistance as proof that you can't. Resistance is often proof that you're near the edge of the familiar, and the edge of the familiar is exactly where learning begins. That's why it feels like friction. That's why it feels like heaviness. And that's why calm repetition is so powerful. It teaches the nervous system that the edge is survivable. Over time, the edge moves. What used to feel unsafe becomes normal, and when something becomes normal, the brain stops resisting it because it stops monitoring it. That's the goal, not constant motivation, but reduced monitoring. Reduced monitoring is freedom. If this video helped you understand the mechanism, then it has done its job. That's what this channel is, quiet explanations of why it feels hard without making you feel worse for it.